Welcome to another episode of the Monte and Wolf Show. We took a Super Bowl break last week, which turned out to be a pretty good idea. It was a pretty good Super Bowl overall. Where did you watch the Super Bowl, Wolf?
So I actually ended up just deciding I wasn't gonna watch it ultimately
Oh
at
my
the end,
God.
because it was Valentine's Day was coming up, and my wife wanted to go out for dinner. We went out for dinner, and I was like, I'm too tired. I just want to sleep. I just ended up sleeping. No, I tried to wake up. So I tried to wake up to see like the end of it, to watch it at home, and I couldn't do it. And then I woke up. I think I woke up 2 minutes before it ended, and just my entire Twitter feed was all super angry about the ref, and everyone is exploding. And then I watched it, and I was like, no, seems like it could be holding. I guess the guy said it ultimately like it was holding. You know, he's like, I did grab him, whatever. Seems like it was a good Super Bowl though. Seemed like it was fun. I couldn't watch
Wow.
it though. I just got some
No,
rest
you
instead.
you didn't watch it. That was the difference. That is funny after you said, we agreed that that's why we're taking a break. It's okay. I watched it. I was gonna have to take a break regardless. I enjoyed it. Doa and his wife were at my house. We had a great time. We ate a bunch of food. You should have been there.
I
But
wish I could have been
anyway,
there.
but anyway, we did miss last week, so we've got a lot to discuss, especially because this is being recorded right after I reviewed on my stream for Bangers Only T1 versus Gen.G. That was something you experienced last night, and I am literally minutes away from watching the end of the third game, where I think it's a great place to start. People
Sure.
saying Peanut through that game. Did Peanut walk into a brush with no reason to do so, with 2 minutes until Baron and 3 minutes until Elder Drake, no reason to clear out wards of the enemy jungle, walking over a Jin trap when he knew Jin was there because he saw it from a hawk shot, so he knew he could get W'd? Yes, he died
Yeah.
stupidly. But
I mean,
also, but also the rest of his team completely ran it down after that fact. Him dying was not the end of that game. There was nothing for T1 to take. They weren't going to be able to dive the turret. Faker used his anti-ult in order to make that play. And we're looking at a scenario where the rest of them could have just walked away, but instead they walk into a really crazy 4v5 and lose the game.
yeah, so I actually was watching your stream a little bit there at the end, and I just pulled up the game because I wanted to look at specifically that moment. And as you say, there's Baron is spawning in like 2:30. It's almost 4 minutes away from Elder. Peanut's walking up into the river brush on the top side of the map, just for context for everybody. There's two Jin traps. There's two wards for T1. All of T1 is top side on the map, and the rest of the team is basically where the inner turret would be for Gen.G on blue side. And Peanut's just walking up there. Now, my only guess is that they're trying to set up a pick onto KIA because he's the closest person there. He's fighting for vision also. He's Jin, so he's very squishy. And if you set up an Ash arrow, Peanut pulls him back, and then Draven ultimate comes through, maybe you blow up KIA. But what are you doing it for? Because as you mentioned, there's no objective. There's like maybe you could get like an inhibitor turret if you all push mid after that, but you wouldn't have your ults anymore, so it's very unlikely you'd actually be able to make that happen against, a fully itemized Annie who can just engage on you if you actually try to push up onto the turret. It's a very bizarre choice. And then as you say, as Peanut is dying, the rest of the team's like, we better fight for this now. We better save him.
TP's in, and Chovy's like flashing. I think he accidentally flashed. I think he like fat
Yeah,
fingered his
he
flash.
misclicked, I think. I think he did.
But I mean, the whole thing is just ridiculous. So yeah, we can blame Peanut. Was it immensely bad to be in that situation, to make that decision when there's nothing to take? Fighting for vision control really doesn't do anything for you. For the love of God, you have Mountain Soul. Just wait until the Baron fight, which you probably win because they've been controlling objectives extremely well.
Yeah.
They got like they got like 2 or 3 consecutive Mountain Drakes. They were winning all the Drake fights at the end of the game.
It was really anticlimactic and a tragedy because the series was so good.
Gen.G should have won this game. They should have won this game.
They absolutely did.
T1 engaged mind control technology to force Gen.G to int from an extremely advantageous situation.
Yeah, it was a pretty heroic game for them too. Up until that point, like it looked pretty doomed in the early game at times, and Gen.G played the mid game super well. I really loved how they were like, yeah, we're just not going to get Sejuani with this Ashe. And we were all like, me and Hooney are losing our minds, Atlas as well, on the desk, because we're like, they're not going to get Sejuani with this. So is it as good as it could be? Because that's the combo where you have Sejuani ult, Ashe ult, you kill somebody. Doesn't matter what your AD carry is, you'll probably kill somebody like every time. And then Peanut is literally pushing people into arrows all
It's
game
so
long,
good.
which is like he's hex flashing the wall to push somebody into an
Or just straight
arrow.
flashing, using flash to do it straight
Yeah,
up. Yeah. No,
and
I mean, and look, I think Peanut's the best Poppy player in the world. I think he proved that last summer when he was just on a complete tear with this champion. He was the one who made Poppy meta worldwide, and
yeah,
he was the best at it. And Gen.G was the best at playing around it. We've seen Poppy a little bit in the LPL also. So it's not like it's a fringe meta pick. But the thing about Poppy is that Poppy, as long as you can get her even, maybe even slightly behind through the early stages of the game, by the time you reach late game objective fights at the professional level, her ult is insane.
yeah. And
It
that's
is
what
so good for professional teams because you can make a power play. You can guarantee yourselves objectives. It is so good.
and that's part of why Gen.G was back in the driver's seat in this game and why they got sold in the first place, because Peanut's ults were really good. He knocks people out of these Baron fights and out of these
He was
Dragon
just knocked
fights.
Faker out before
Yeah,
Faker could use ult on Annie or engage. It's just
yeah. If
goodbye.
Faker ults
Free
him,
dragon.
then
They
you
got
lost
full
your
because of that.
yeah. And if Faker ults Poppy, then Faker's ults down, so you win the fight anyways. Like it was a really good play, and it looked like Gen.G had prepared this pick potentially for this type of scenario, because they held it towards the end of the draft. And I mean, a lot was removed, right? And in the drafting phase, I was like, ooh, this doesn't look so good for Gen.G. And then the Peanut Poppy comes back through, and I'm inclined to trust, right? Like whenever I see
Of
Peanut play
course.
Poppy, I'm like, well, I mean, it can't be like worse than a 7 out of 10, like, probably in every scenario. And then he played it so well. It was such a disappointing end, but unfortunately for Peanut, this is kind of becoming a weird pattern where, in some of these critical matches, he kind of chokes or he gets overextended trying to do who knows what. Like he's thinking
To do
faster
nothing.
than, yeah,
I
I
mean,
mean, he's
we saw this at Worlds too when he was on Graves and he's like in the enemy jungle for no reason at all, right? Dying.
he's looking for picks, but like now is not the time to look for picks, And like in this case, but with the follow up he has with Delight and Pays, like the Ash arrow into the Draven ultimate, like he probably can kill Jhin. Like he can kill Keria in this game, but there's just no reason to risk it. And there's so much setup here for T1. For some reason, T1's Annies, especially too, seem to be like a taunt button for some of these teams where they just chase into the jungle with no vision, and then like, I hope there's not a Flash Tibbers over there. Like that would be really unfortunate. Yeah, that last game was really interesting though, because I guess we can kind of like talk about the series backwards in a way, since we started with game 3. The early game was so good for T1 because Guma and Keria got lane control, and then Faker was able to just randomly be able to get bot and set up a dive without Chovy contesting. And that was super bizarre to me when we were desking it last night. And then I went home and watched it last night again, and
Pays through that.
Chovy just lets him go. Like he
Well,
just lets him
Chovy
go.
lets him go. The reason why Chovy lets him go is because Pays and Delight are full HP, and Peanut is going into the bot side, right? And he thinks, oh well, they knew Faker was heading down there. But the thing is, Pays then decides to make a trade in a minion wave with like 8 caster minions, right? Then he gets chunked out by Gumayushi and Keria, and all of a sudden now it's still a 3v, it's a 3v4 with Faker down there, but there is a 1 HP Draven. If he doesn't do that, if Pace doesn't do that, then they probably can't dive that turret. So I don't blame Chovy. I blame Pays for taking the world's dumbest trade to get him to 1 HP, and then that changes the entire color of the situation. And now it's like Chovy has to be there now, but there was no reason for Chovy to believe he needed to be there until Pays made that decision.
Yeah, I still think Chovy could have prevented Faker from going down if he wanted to, if they like, because sensing the communication between how the bot lane is turning and how things are going. Like, yes, Faker left before Chovy like could have stopped him if you're talking about like timing of that trade where Pays goes super low. But I think communication has to be a little bit better here in these types of scenarios because this is what T1 does. They just constantly dive. And I if I'm Chovy, instead of like being like, well, maybe I could get like 3 extra CS here, maybe just make sure that your bot lane doesn't get totally stomped.
Especially because in game 2, you
Yeah,
know,
the whole game was defined by that.
They were diving 4v3 and executing insanely good dives. And even when Peanut was there shadowing, he would die as well. They would just trade 3 for 0 underneath the turret. And to be fair, I think T1 is one of the best diving teams in the world, and we've seen them execute these situations, and giving them Elise is probably a massive mistake. But yeah, I think if you look at what had happened in game number 2, perhaps you are more overly cautious as Gen.G on that situation in game 3.
I was really disappointed with Doran's early game 2 into Zeus. Like he had that play super early on in the game where he like flashed to try to get a kill, and
he
basically assumed that Zeus just wouldn't flash, which is like a really weird, bizarre assumption. He's like, look, best top laner in LCK. What if I just get him? Like, I hate plays like that where you flash on a ranged champion, hoping that you will kill them before they react. Like, that's a solo queue move. And even in solo queue, like if you're playing at the top level, like they're gonna flash, right? So I was really disappointed with that one because I was like, oh man, like you've completely opened this matchup up to Zeus having complete control because you hoped he wouldn't flash fast enough. Super early all in from Doran, he gives up the first blood. So that happens top side. Bottom side, Annie gets a dive off versus a Victor, which you picked early in the draft because of the Annie, because you thought maybe Annie is going to go mid. You don't stop the Annie from roaming. So why, all of these problems happen. And despite all of that, like that's the thing, despite all of that going wrong, Gen.G played the mid game so beautifully around those Ashe arrows. Yep. And I'm like,
and their Drake control was really strong.
But it ends because Peanut dies and the rest of the team just decides to end after that. Like, oh, that was like the ultimate buzzkill moment, because it's one of those games where you're only like you're watching the game and you're like, oh, it looks like T1's gonna win this, and then you suddenly get more and more excited because you're like, wait, Gen.G could pull this off. Look at the coordination, look at the plays, like look at how clean this team is. And then you're like, oh, never mind. Like, erase everything I said about how clean this team is, like how they're all on the same page, like they're super smart. Look at the setups. It's one of those games where you're like, which Gen.G are we gonna get in the next series? After Gen.G had a hard time in their previous series this week, you just don't know. You just don't know.
Yep. Yeah, I think this was, possibly a preview of the finals. And even though these games were kind of sloppy, especially I would say the first game of the series, but part of that was that there was a very weird game state with like Aurelia with a kill at level 1. And yeah, it made things a little bit messier, I think, from the player side as they were figuring out how to play in that particular match. And I think Gen.G did a very good job of coming back in a rough situation where they couldn't actually execute their game plan because of what happened at level 1. So even though it definitely wasn't, I would say, as high quality as the Dplus T1 series that happened earlier this season, it was still very fun to watch, even if there were a lot of kind of frustrating throw moments from a variety of players. Like, felt like everybody took turns in that regard, whether it was like Peanut or Faker or Zeus. These are all players who got caught out, got abused at times, and made the game swing very wildly. But it was really entertaining.
The amount of crazy buffered hook escapes from KIA in game 1 on the Nautilus, paired with how perfectly he played the level 1 fight, where he's making sure he roots every single player individually, while also like playing the. I literally tweeted in the middle of that game, like, KIA's the best player in the world, like, doesn't matter, like if he wins or loses, like it doesn't matter, like this guy's performances on any given day, whether it's enchanter support, melee support, like his performance in that first game was mind-blowingly good, like the amount of hooks where he buffers and escapes at the perfect timing, the only window in which you have to actually get out on that Nautilus pick, was just like insanity to me. that first game was the best game of the three. I thought, like, from the level 1, exchange to the recovery of Gen.G, some of the great plays T1 had in the mid game. I think that T1 really wanted that Gnar pick to come out. They wanted to play Aurelia into it, and they were trying to figure out what to ban to sell it in that first draft. And I think that's why they dropped the ban by mistake, because they were like, not entirely sure what we want to ban here, because I want to play the Aurelia into Doran's Gnar. And then they got their wish in the end anyways. But besides that dropped ban and some mistakes from T1, I guess you could say in the mid to late game, it did end up being a great game. And I feel like we saw Gen.G versus T1 look like this. We saw T1 versus Dplus look like this earlier in the season, where it ends up being with these top teams in the LCK. I wouldn't call Dplus KIA a top team right now, but at the beginning of the season, they definitely were.
Sure.
It becomes a game of like, who makes the fewest mistakes and who gets caught in the worst possible scenario. And I think it's kind of a moment where we can like zoom in on the state of the game, where there's so much pick potential, there's so much CC in the game right now, and damage is so high, even with the durability patch, that like if you make a mistake like Peanut made, like the game is decided by it essentially, right? Like, and it's a sad state of affairs, I don't want to see games like this that are super back and forth, and there's all the macro, great setup decided by like, oopsie, got him in the jungle one time.
I disagree. I think Peanut did deserve to lose the game, but also I will point out that I don't think that lost the game. I think the piling on after Peanut died by Gen.G, I think it took a lot more.
Sure. I mean, I'll give you that. I'll give you that. And I mean, I do think a Poppy is not, a Poppy dying like this, even though she's super tanky, is not indicative of like the game state. It's just like, well, I mean, he was way up there. But still, like, a lot of the turns in these games have been about like somebody overextending. And I think some of that's nerves for these players. A lot of the T1 players are still extremely young, right? So there's that. But I wish we had less CC in the game. I do wish that a lot.
I mean, that's fair. To your point earlier too, I think I'm curious what you think. Is KIA your current MVP, leading MVP candidate for this split?
Yeah,
Because
I would
he is
say
for
so.
me.
I would say so. Like in the past, sometimes when I voted for KIA for season MVP as number 1, like where in one season where he ultimately got it for the first time as a support player, it was kind of like, all right, KIA is insanely good, but it's not like a year where I'm looking at KIA going, oh my god, he's done everything. Like, this is the sickest. But I'm like, okay, he's the most consistent player. Nobody has been as consistent as he has. Nobody's played as many champions as he has. And a lot of times I vote for KIA.
Nobody's innovated
like
the world meta like he has. I mean, he's been the single most. His choices have had the single largest effect of any individual player on the world's meta.
Yeah,
right now.
And he like that's what I was getting at, is like this season I'm like, I mean, there is just no way it can be anyone else at this moment in time, because
okay.
Like normally in the past, I'm like, yeah, KIA is really consistent. Like he played a lot of Thresh, whatever, but like he's really good. He played Thresh and Tom Kench like all season, but he's the best at it, and like his performance is the most consistent. He empowers Guma, he empowers Faker. Like, T1's the top 3 team like every season, but he's also like the most consistent part of it. And so it's kind of easy to just be like, yeah, it's KIA, and like not even think about it. You're like, is there anyone who's even close to KIA? You're like, no. But this time it's like so massively obviously him in my mind, right? Like, I'm trying to think of who I'd even put second at this moment in time, and it's really hard. Like, I could have said Deft in the first few weeks. I can't say that anymore.
I think Chubby's probably still under consideration if we're being honest, from Gen.G.
Yeah, I'd say, yeah, his consistency is not there, but like he's had some really high highs. I'd say if you really want to like point out one player's had incredible stats and incredible performances even in losses, like Viper could be maybe in consideration.
I mean, Willer, considering the quality of the team.
Yeah. Too bad Willer's not a rookie, man. Easy rookie of the year pick.
Yeah, Willer is arguably the best jungler in the LCK right now.
Yeah, it's between him and Owner for sure. And like, I know a bunch of Canyon enthusiasts will say like, no, Canyon's better. I mean, he was way better than Willer when Willer first.
I mean, I did in fact have eyes and watch the Dplus versus Liiv SANDBOX game earlier today. We'll get into Liiv SANDBOX though, because I think I probably have different opinions about Liiv SANDBOX than you do.
Um, I guess some other things to talk about in this T1 Gen.G series before we finish on this one is like the Annie drafting was pretty cool. Like I really thought T1 used the Annie in the draft pretty well. And this was a series where I thought, okay, we've kind of made Annie standard now. Like Annie is not like a niche pick anymore. It's actually a pick that both can defend a weak side bot lane extremely well. We've seen Zeri Annie defend dives. You know, you can set up a lot of different lanes that way. And then wins the early game of a lot of mid matchups very well and could set up for junglers extremely well. So it forces teams to pick Victor into it. At least that's what we're seeing in the LCK right now. I don't know if that's necessarily the most optimal way to handle the Annie. We're not seeing Orianna, which has been something that people have talked about a lot as an Annie counter in mid. But we're seeing teams pick Annie early and keep it flexible and keep teams guessing. And it's usually drawn out that early Victor. So then you're like, all right, well, we know what we're up against in the mid lane. Victor's not really a flex pick at all. Can't really play him topside at all in this meta. There's just no chance. There's no way. So you get to define the draft that way. And then you can set up a different bottom lane if you want. If it seems like you can pull off a draft where you can flex the Annie mid instead of playing support. But the enemy team is like, well, it could be both. Like I don't know. I have to think about this a lot. So I like that Gen.G was willing to ban it actually, even because I think it adds so much to T1's draft to have it. And when they didn't ban it, like the drafts of Gen.G suffered significantly. They weren't able to get the Sejuani pick, for example, in that Ashe game because they're like, gotta get Victor. Like that's what they decided. Liking to see that. Also, really wanted to talk about.
Well, it's also, I think the Annie pick is very interesting for T1 because T1 is such a dangerous team on red side because they will basically always save, support picks for the most part to R5 at this point in time. So when you pick the Annie early, you just don't know where it's going. You don't know if it's going mid. They played it support earlier this week against Liiv SANDBOX. So it's a very good flex pick for them on red side in particular.
And then the other thing that I thought was really cool in this game was how T1 used Zeus's Jace with Gore Drinker because we have seen Gore Drinker built on Jace in the LCK. And like at that time, I can't remember which player it was earlier in this week. It was one of the weaker teams, if I'm not mistaken. But at that time, it was like, all right, this is weird and I don't like it. And yeah, Eclipse losing Omnivamp. You get some sustain with that, like fine. And then it wasn't utilized very well. The Jace poke damage felt like it was extremely lacking in that game. And you were like, all right, this is terrible. Then you see how T1 play around Zeus on Gordringer Jace, where he's basically always in melee form, running around the map, fighting and forcing skirmishes. He's not just like waiting in a bush using accelerated shock blast. He's actually playing this like a melee assassin that's now more survivable because he has this Gore Drinker and he's fighting nonstop. I thought that was the best example of Gore Drinker Jace that we've seen so far in the LCK. And T1 played around that extremely well. And Zeus was always fighting nonstop with the Jace in a different way than we see Jace played in pro play normally. So that was kind of inspiring to watch for me, honestly.
Yeah, I thought it was a cool adaptation as well. Really, actually changed the fabric of the game by denying a dive because he had the Gore Drinker at one point in time. So yeah, it's fun. And I think T1 still is the best team in the world. That's my take. Did my power rankings. If you guys haven't seen them on the Last Free Nation YouTube channel, you guys can check that out. But T1 was at the top, and they continue to validate my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I think right now, I haven't obviously been able to watch that much of the LPL, but I've heard rumblings that like it seems to be a little bit unstable right now, so to speak. With
JDG
a lot of the teams
JDG has had a bad week and a half. Is really the problem. They looked extremely good before that, but have shown some cracks. So, and top has been a little bit more consistent recently. So I think probably most people can agree that T1 deserves the #1 spot. And then there is an argument that probably the current, as of right now, if I were to remake my power rankings for this week, the power rankings would probably go like this. They would probably go top 4 would be T1, top, Gen.G, JDG. Just based on recent results and form.
Okay. I've seen some clips of JDG. Let's just say that. I've seen some clips. Like, so just for context for people watching, like I don't watch that much LPL, which always shocks people because they're like, but it's in your time zone. It's like really close by. It's almost like the sister league of the LCK. And it's the two best regions. I'm always casting every day while the LPL is on.
Correct.
And then when I go home, I prepare for casting the next day and go to sleep. So there's just not a
Yeah.
whole lot. There's not a
No,
whole
no,
lot
no.
of
Trust me.
opportunity.
When I was casting in Korea, I also didn't watch the LPL for that exact reason. It was especially because unfortunately, most Western fans want to hear, most English speaking fans want to hear opinions about LCS and LEC, which meant that I would have to watch those other leagues to prepare for summoning insight and like interacting with the Western community. Whereas LPL has been the lowest viewed league by English speakers forever. And so there wasn't as much point to watch it, even though it has been good until now. Now, because of what I'm doing in terms of content, is doing the bangers only and like trying to do these power rankings and top plays and stuff like this. Now it makes a lot of sense for me to consume a lot of the LPL.
Yeah. I watch a lot of LEC randomly because it goes on at like, sometimes 1 a.m., 2 a.m. for me. So if I'm up late, I'll watch like 1 or 2 games of LEC before I go to sleep. So I'm like much more in tune with what the LEC is doing often than what the LPL is doing, just for context. So I think T1 is definitely the best team in the LCK. There are a few teams challenging for that spot, but they're not quite able to at this moment in time be able to. I could be like, well, I don't know if we know T1 is really the best. Like, I think we do know that T1 is really the best. Do we know who's number
they
two?
did almost. They probably should have lost this series,
But that doesn't.
they
I mean,
pulled it
even if
out
they lost this series, does that make them number two just because they lost to Gen.G? I don't know.
in a very close. What would have been a very close best of 3.
Yeah, especially considering how the wins for Gen.G were comeback wins. Like in game 1, kind of a big comeback, and then in game 3, like if they had won, it was also off the back foot of, that solo kill Doran kind of inting a little bit in the top side, and then, the bottom dives happening and Gumayusi getting ahead. Then Gen.G like fought their way back, which is really cool and impressive. But still, when you consider like T1's early game in a snowballing meta, I still think that like it's like Gen.G should have won game 3, but also T1 should have won game 3. If you like roll it back even further. So
yeah. No, my point is they are very competitive with each other, and I don't feel super like I would predict T1 to win a best of 5 at this point in time, but it would be like, 60-40, 55-45.
it
It
goes
wouldn't
5
be.
games.
It's not like a ridiculous. It's not. I don't think it's a ridiculous stomp, and I think Gen.G still has that opportunity to win.
Sure.
You want to
Which
talk about
series?
Liiv SANDBOX? I think we should just talk about Liiv SANDBOX because
Okay.
this was like a big prove it week for Liiv SANDBOX, because they were playing both Dplus and T1, and this is it was very interesting because T1 was the end of their first round robin, and Dplus was the start of their second round robin. And if you guys remember, in the first meeting of Dplus and Liiv SANDBOX, it was an insane stomp by Dplus. Like they got absolutely wrecked. Liiv SANDBOX.
It was disgustingly bad.
Yeah,
Like
they played horrifically. Deft basically took a shit on them, and they couldn't do. Like I thought Envy was going to have to retire after that series.
I saw it and I was like, Envy played so badly in that first game that we were like looking at each other like, oh my god, like this is a franchise league, we are doomed. Like we're gonna have to cast this team, twice a week, guys. Like we were like, we were literally like starting to like we were pulling the Shanghai Dragons logos out. Like we were like, oh, it's gonna be one of those seasons. Like that first series
now
was
they're
so
7-3, and now they're 7-3.
The first series was so bad though. We were ready to be like, this is gonna be the worst team we've seen since like Solely One Prince, But then they've turned it around, right? And that's why that series was super sick, where they actually dumpstered in return Dplus KIA. And Envy had a great series. He played extremely well. Willer gapped Canyon. So there's that. Like Canyon had a really bad game too, which was pretty bizarre because he had all the tools to have success. Like he's playing Elise, he's got a lane to dive, they've got Prio, and he couldn't make it happen. Then he got killed, isolated in the river next to the Drake pit, seemingly randomly. And Canyon's had kind of an off last 2 years, and I do wonder why Dplus KIA is struggling so much, because they have a great roster, right? They got Deft on the team now.
Hold on. We'll get to that. Let's talk about Liiv SANDBOX first, because I
Okay,
want
okay,
to
okay. Okay.
I want to complete the thoughts about Liiv SANDBOX, because this team, I think, is to talk more about like the mirror of matches that happened. So in the first series, Def didn't die at all, right? And in this 2-0 by Liiv SANDBOX, Envy didn't die at all. So there is like a very cool bookend to this. And Liiv SANDBOX is an interesting team. I do think that they are kind of fraudulent. I don't think that this is gonna. I think that people are getting irrationally excited about them when this team still has, in my mind, like quite a few flaws. And the problem that I see with Liiv SANDBOX is that they're a very momentum based team, which is like when they start to win, they can win really hard and they play very aggressively, which makes them fun to watch, right? And because Closer plays a lot of these like melee champions as he has traditionally, he is, a fun to watch mid laner. Envy is a hyper aggressive AD carry. Like if you want to have a good time, go watch him play in that first game versus Dplus, where he's like frontline Varus with Lee Sin and Annie shields all over him and a shield bow. And it's really fun. Like it's really fun to watch that. But this and Willer has been arguably, maybe some people take owners, but you can make an argument that Willer is the best jungler in the league right now.
Yeah.
He has looked insanely good. His invades are fun. He puts out more pressure, especially on Wukong, than most other players do with that champion in the early game. This team has a lot of synergy, but I just don't see like this run of form continuing. Dplus was already on a downswing. If you want to see the dark side of Liiv SANDBOX, watch game 2 that they played against T1, where they got absolutely raffle stomped. Like not even it was on track to be a perfect game from T1.
Yeah. Yeah, that game was really rough. And I think the game 1 against T1, if we go back to that, Zeus played Yasuo
into Gnar, which is a classic counter pick, But
Yeah.
yes, it was
I mean,
clearly not super. It was not the most serious game that we've ever
there
seen.
are other more relevant, recently utilized counter picks for Gnar than the ego pick of the. I mean, what felt like an ego pick to me in this draft, and then they fell behind, and then they constantly tried to dive and into tidal waves, which didn't go well for them. I thought it was, and obviously the Cyclones there too from Willer. I
Also,
thought
Gumayusi has never been a good Zeri player. That's
No.
another factor, guys. Like, remember that T1 wasn't doing so hot in summer primarily because Gumayusi was pretty bad in the Zeri Sivir meta. That was probably their single biggest flaw. And so, credit to Envy and Kyle, who played out of their minds in the laning phase, and credit to Liiv SANDBOX in game number 1, because they did snowball that win effectively. They did. Like, they legitimately won that game. But I agree with you, Wolf. I just don't think that T1 was the most serious, and they were certainly not on champions that they've been traditionally strong at.
And then we go to game 2, and it's like angry T1 is the meme. Like they're really angry, and then they smash them.
Also, they
And
gave
then
Gumayusi Caitlyn, which you just don't do.
yeah, you don't do that.
You just don't
Teams
do
gotta stop doing that. It's actually just don't do that. Like just don't give this team Caitlyn when they have 2 of the best Caitlyn players in the LCK on one team.
Yeah, remember, guys. remember last spring when you couldn't give T1 Caitlyn just because of Gubayusi because he had a 90% win rate. Well, now he has above a 90% win rate because he keeps getting it. And not only that, but now KIA can play Caitlyn too, as Wolf was pointing out. So it's like now it's even more dumb to give them Caitlyn. It was dumb a year ago.
Yeah, I'm not liking the amount of dumb picks teams have been giving to other teams, like giving Deft Caitlyn and giving Deft the Lucian pick so many times we've seen this season. Just don't do it. Just play against your opponent's strengths. Don't just be like, I have the answer. I'm a weaker team, but I think I can outplay them because we have a plan. No, don't do that. And in that game, their plan was to put Birdall on Jace, and have him hit a Scion, and because they are like, all right, well they got Caitlyn, but they won't get Jace too. We'll take that, and then T1 just had the better draft. It was really messy. That was actually the Gore Drinker game I was not remembering earlier. I just looked it up. It was when Birdall played with Gore Drinker. Did not go well. Trying to play Gore Drinker into Sejuani and Scion. Unsurprisingly.
I mean, to be fair, playing Poke into Scion as Jace also is bad. If you're gonna play Jace, just fucking bad Scion, please. It's really bad to play Jace into Scion.
Or just play it into a composition where you're gonna have a lot of better ways to deal with the Scion. I think it's okay to play it into Scion because like if you're gonna get Jace, you're trying to get lane prio. If they pick Scion, then you're feeling good about other aspects of your draft, right? Like, okay, they're not gonna be able to play around top side, so maybe you could play around your bottom side. Oh wait, they have Caitlyn. So like, I'm gonna pick Scion because we'll win. I think T1 is like, all right, well, we're just gonna pick Scion because you can't actually break top now, and you let us have Caitlyn Lux, so you can't win bottom. And then, there's a 0. We'll just play Corki. It's fine. Don't worry. Like, we can't lose any of the lanes, and then we'll just win these skirmishes and win the game. That was a bad draft from Liiv SANDBOX.
It was bad.
Yeah, but yeah. I think Liiv SANDBOX, they are quietly, I think, potentially, like, right now they're breaking top 3 in the standings, right? But do we really trust that they'll stay there?
No. Here's the thing.
Hold on. In summer, though, could they be a top 3 team if they continue to develop?
Look, this is where you and I are gonna disagree. So KT is better, first off, and second off, surely one of Dplus or Hanwha Life is gonna figure their shit out later on this summer. One of them has to. It may not be both of them. It could be both of them, but surely one of them is going to get better than Liiv SANDBOX.
My money is that it'll be Hanwha right now, but
that is fair given recent results.
I also agree, though. We can talk about this like as not a segue necessarily, but a tie-in. I actually do think KT is better than Liiv SANDBOX as well. I agree with you. I think KT has looked really good in crisis situations. They have KT in the past was similar to Liiv SANDBOX, where it's like, okay, you have to be winning really hard. Like, aiming's ahead. He's going to pop off. He's going to carry on Zeri because the laning phase went for free. Or he randomly got 2 kills on a Drake fight he wasn't supposed to get, and KT's going to snowball the game. Maybe they're going to Worlds. Like, last summer, we were like, okay, maybe KT, this could happen. And then this year, it feels like even when behind, KT make all the right choices. Cuz has been really smart, which I feel like was something that I would rarely say a lot of the time last year. Like, I thought he had a really rough time, and was really recovering from all the teams he's been through and stuff like that. Hasn't actually even found like a stable home, is always trying to figure out his identity. And now, like, because he was an aggressive jungle player, he's like, give me Rek'Sai, like, I'm just gonna pop off, like, I'll play Talon, and now he's like, oh, I'm Sejuani every game, and I like it, like, he's developed a lot as a player. And KT look to be really good. And when I look at Liiv SANDBOX KT right now, they're both behind T1 and Gen.G on their best days. Like, on T1 and Gen.G's best days, no ego drafting, no happy gaming. Like, on their best days, I think they're both ahead of KT and Liiv SANDBOX.
Because we didn't have a show last week. Like, we can talk about Gen.G versus KT, but Gen.G in game number 2 picked the nerf version of Yuumi and let BDD have Kassadin for no reason, and then lost the third game. So do I think Gen.G does that in a real fucking best of 5? No, I do not. So I think Gen.G was cocky there. I also think Dplus was pretty cocky in their draft too. It's like, hey guys, how have we been winning most of our games this season? Oh yeah, we've been playing through bot lane. Should we give Deft Ziggs to wave clear and play a roaming Pyke? Oh yeah, that sounds like how we've been winning, like prioritizing through Kana and top lane. What the fuck are you doing, Dplus? Like, no, it's not necessarily that your draft is bad, but you can't do that. You are not that. You are not those guys. So I will say, this is why you temper the excitement about KT. Did they win both of those best of 3s? Yes, they did. Were those kind of troll games in games number 2 where they reverse swept, getting momentum and kind of a free win from troll games? Yes, it was. So
I mean, look, I will say, I don't think that KT is better than Gen.G, and I don't think that best of 3 is if anyone's trying to say, like, well, they beat Gen.G, so they're better than Gen.G, that doesn't make sense if you look at the context of the best of 3. But how they beat Gen.G, especially in game 3, and the way they played, the level of play we did see from KT in that final game, I think is indicative of KT's skill level, which is very high, right? Top 3 potentially.
Yeah, I think that they are good enough that you can't disrespect them like they were disrespected in some of these series, especially by Gen.G, and expect to win a best of 3. So lesson learned, I think, hopefully, from some of these teams.
Yeah, and like, I think that if you look at KT and Hanwha Life and Liiv SANDBOX and all these other teams that are floating below T1 and Gen.G, right? I think the teams that have the most potential to grow are Liiv SANDBOX and Hanwha Life. And I'll tell you why, because I think Liiv SANDBOX is a young roster that clearly is momentum based, as you mentioned, but also they are dealing with a top laner, Birdall, who's extremely emotional, seems to have literal, like, you know, crippling anxiety at times when he's on stage. And this is something that's been discussed for him for a long time. But he's starting to seem more comfortable, right? Willer's like taking care of him a lot. You could see it in the comms. This team has a lot of space to grow. Closer is also still extremely young, even though he's like the veteran on the team, so to speak.
Willer seems like such a positive cheerleader, for Liiv SANDBOX and the comms.
And then Hanwha Life, I look at this team and I'm like, this team has so much raw talent, you know, who are also still somewhat veterans. Like, you have Klid on this roster, right? I think that this team has so much potential, with Viper starting to kind of get back into calming in Korean and stuff like that. Like, it seemed to be an issue for him at the beginning of the season. He's playing incredibly well. Highest DPM out of any 80 carry, and this is on a 6th place team. So just keep that in mind. Those are the teams I think are going to grow the most. I think Dplus seems... I look at this team, and I said on the broadcast earlier this week, Dplus's best player right now is, or most consistent player, I should say, is Kellen. That's crazy to say. You look at that lineup, I'm like, Kellen is the guy that you trust. When you have Canyon and Showmaker, you have Kana and Deft on this team, and you're like, oh, I trust Kellen.
I think we can go into Dplus because it came out in the interview recently with Ashley Kang, I believe, where Showmaker said that he was pretty, like, demotivated, burned out with the game, which, you know, Damwon's been in, like, you know, they've made deep runs at the last 3 worlds. It takes a lot out of players, because the difference between a team that competes heavily internationally in League of Legends and a team that doesn't is literally like 4 more months of gameplay a year. And especially in not this last year, but the previous 2 years, they made the longest run possible all the way into the finals 2 years in a row. So you have very limited time off in the off season at that point. You get off on November 1st, you take a couple weeks, and then you're right back in the team house prepping for the next season, like boot camping. So you compare that to a player in League of Legends who doesn't go to Worlds. It's like, okay, well, they end their season in August or September, and they don't play again until December. So,
and I've spoken with teams that, you know, who don't make playoffs, for example. I've spoken with teams that don't go to Worlds. Like, I've been to team houses, and the way they operate in Korea generally is like, as soon as you're eliminated, you have like a few, a few meetings with the team about like how long the break is going to be, when they're going to start, when they're planning on starting like talks for renegotiations for the next year, if people's contracts are up, and what they're going to do during that time. But it's basically like, we will meet up a few times, have some discussions, have some meetings, update you guys on what the team is thinking, what we're going to do. But it's kind of like, go stream, go spend time with your family. Like, you know, sucks we didn't make playoffs and or Worlds, you know, but like, that's it. Like, go be you. It's off season now. And speaking from, you know, a caster's perspective, of someone who like knows that feeling too, when spring season ends, you're like, you have a few meetings with LCK people, and you're like, all right, well, like, otherwise, like, go do your thing. Like, you know, it's rest time now. I know that feeling of relief, but if you make Worlds, you're like, all right, so we're getting plane tickets, you know, like, who's flying economy, who's flying business, like, we're gonna do this, like, how many weeks early are we going to try to get used to the time zone, and you're gonna have to play with a bunch of NA players, like, sorry man, like, you're gonna have to play like Champions Queue, and like Riot really likes it, so like, please do it, and like, you know, go on the stream and do all these things, and you got to practice, and like, you're like, oh man, can I just have like 1 week, like maybe like 3 days, and then you know we gotta get scrimming and start talking about schedule and stuff. Like you just don't have a lot of time. You really
Yeah, and as
don't.
soon as Worlds ends, if your contract is up, then you're immediately renegotiating. Or actually, as we all know, those renegotiations already happened behind Riot's back, and they never penalize anybody for it. It's the reality. But the point is like, even if you're at Worlds, you're stressed out by playing, and then also like thinking about what your next year might be. Or even if you're not on contracts, you may be like, who the fuck am I even playing with next year?
Yeah, I
Right.
mean, you have to the contract negotiation period, and we'll see if this changes at all with the new Riot rules for LCK next year, or for like the negotiation for next year because that did not take effect in the previous
Right.
offseason. It will be taking effect this
Right.
offseason starting in November. We'll see if that affects anything, but I mean, I can tell you guys from personal experience, some things I've heard and literally seen. Some of these negotiations happen for like world champion teams and world championship players, or players who win worlds like the next day, like the
Yep.
day after worlds, or in some cases that night. Because the second that you are a world champion, your value changes and everybody wants you. And like if you're the team who is the world championship team, you got to make sure you can keep that player. If you want to, then you have to like make sure that they don't like you're like, all right, so what are you thinking? Like we got to talk now because you get all these offers and stuff. And then this player, even if you're like a world champion, you have to like you have to deal with all of this pressure and stress like immediately. You don't even get a minute to be like, oh, let me just
I
like
mean,
kiss the trophy and chill.
this
Like,
is just something we saw, Wolf. So we could talk about this because it was in a public place. But when we were in San Francisco and we were at the last Free Nation watch party for the World Finals, right? We packed up everything, we left, we went to a bar, and there were a bunch of people who looked like the DRX players' parents talking to people in DRX gear, literally right after the World Finals.
yeah, I mean, this is the kind of like instant negotiation that happens, right? Where you you know that all of your players are going to be getting a bajillion offers, and this is actually a problem in esports in general. Is there's not enough stability in teams right now to where like I'll say this first. I don't think DRX would have been successful if they stayed together. I do think
No.
they'd be really struggling. They might be where Hanwha Life is right now, but like this would not just be a team that just runs it back and wins LCK. Zero chance of that in my mind. But the fact that like teams don't have the stability right now and like so many teams just throw money and like buy players and parts, and there's no legacy roster except T1 really that stays together, and you're like, okay, this is this team. I know it has an identity and like they're strong together and they're growing together. I think that's really sad, but it's the reality of esports right now, especially League of Legends. So you have to like instantly start talking with these players, their parents, their agents. In this case, some of these players' parents are their agents. But like you have to be extremely fast and grab onto these players if you're gonna get them, and you're probably not gonna get them. You're probably not gonna keep them, but like the players don't get a second to rest is the ultimate point we're trying to make here. And Dplus KIA have gone to so many international events, especially, the core of this roster, Showmaker and Kenya have gone to so many international events over the
Yeah.
last few years. And Showmaker was even adamant about it in like 2021 after MSI. He was like, I'm really burnt out. I'm so sick of this. Like, that was when Damwon KIA then lost to RNG in that 5-game finals with like the coin flip debacle and all that stuff. And like he came back and he's like, I'm super burnt out. Like I'm really
Right.
tired, and that was 2 years
Yeah.
ago nearly.
And
And the guy has really been struggling with motivation. And you could understand why.
yeah. And I think too, when you look at D plus, the core of this team is the synergy between Showmaker and Kenya. That is the team's identity around these two players. Like it has been built very intentionally. Showmaker is Showmaker is a macro mid laner who is known for roaming and making plays to help his teammates on the map. That is who he is. And what we're seeing now is a Showmaker who gets caught out on the map, which is very unShowmaker like. That's not who he's been. He's usually the one who's hyper aware of his positioning and where the play has to be made. And these moments where he's being caught out, like he was against Liiv SANDBOX, are causing them to lose, major objectives. And so if he's not that guy, he doesn't have the same value. Like he lost his greatest strength, it feels like. And it's that synergy, Canyon is the carry of this team. It's basically, it's not this extreme, so don't get mad at this analogy, but in the same way that Gen.G was a supportive mid laner that enabled Faker, Showmaker is a more supportive mid laner that enables Canyon. Not to the same degree. I'm not saying Showmaker
I see what you're saying.
is the Gen.G of mid laners, because he is a better player relative to his position than Gen.G was, but they had a style and a synergy that worked in that way.
Sure. Like the same way that, Chovy on Hot Life Esports had like a rotating door of junglers that supported him, and made, him look really good, like Willer in particular when he was on Hanwha Life. It does feel like, because Showmaker is having problems with like his motivation, and in burnout, he's looked a little bit off this year in the season, and like there's things that like we see as casters, that like I don't know officially, right? I mean, sometimes we get the official confirmation. Kellen had an injury, right? The guy, he was walking on stage weird. We got the confirmation he had a foot injury. I don't know exactly specifically what it was, but we know he had a foot injury. Didn't affect his play that much, but we knew that. Showmaker seems to have potentially some like hand injury. It just seems, based on how he moves and how he plays and like how exhausted he looks all the time, he may have some sort of hand injury. This happens to pro gamers all the time. This is my speculation, by the way, but like he may have a hand injury. He is also, extremely burnt out, and this is not speculation. It was at first, but now he's done interviews and said like, "Yo, I'm burnt out." Yeah, so I don't think there's anything, like, the only way to fix this is to try to get him like a sports psychologist, or, let him kind of play through it. Maybe he starts getting better results. He starts enjoying the game again. I mean, he's also like saying, "I'm burnt out. I don't enjoy playing League of Legends anymore." But like 3 days before, he's got stream clips of him playing like mid AP Alistair and like cracking the fuck up and like having the best time ever. So I think it's not about like him not enjoying the game per se, but just not enjoying being a professional player in this setting that is extremely competitive, where you are a world champion, you're on a org that is expected to be top 3 in the LCK, big 3 team. There's so much pressure on you, and then when you're struggling, when you're not feeling it and you're underperforming, like people are pointing fingers at you online, like maybe he's not enjoying that aspect of pro life right now. Maybe he's starting to win again, and maybe the team gets a second win in the second round robin. Maybe he'll shake off the burnout. Maybe they'll go to MSI. I mean, I don't think it's likely at this point in time, but maybe that's how you fix it. But it's hard for Dplus to be like, we're gonna call up Pulbay, like, because Pulbay is the challengers player. I believe he's of age to play in the LCK, but there's no reason to pull him in, because then you just depress Showmaker further, right? Like, yeah, you're having a, people don't understand this. I see this all the time. Why don't they just pull Thanatos from the LCK Challengers team? He's way better than Kana. Like, Kana sucked that one game, so let's just overreact and pull this guy up. Because what that does to a player, to bench them for a Challengers player, and by the way, these Challengers players are not as good as you guys think. They are very good, but they're not as good as you guys think, and they're not proven on an LCK stage against much tougher opponents, right? I get really frustrated when I see comments like, "Well, just pull Showmaker out, man. Like, he sucks now." I'm like, you do that, and you then further exacerbate all of his problems he's having right now with burnout and stuff. You stress him out further. That's not actually how you solve this problem. And he and Canada are the franchise players. They're the guys in the intro that come in the opening that LCK made. They are the most famous players on this team. They're your value. They're what sell your sponsors, etc. You can't just yoink these guys. You have to like fix the problem. You can maybe yoink them next year if like nothing changes, but you can't just pull them out in the middle of the season, which I see people calling for this all the time, and it drives me crazy, because it just doesn't make sense.
Yeah. And plus, like, Showmaker, as you're saying, is a 2-time world finalist, 1-time world champion. Actually did play pretty well last year. He wasn't the issue. And I think maybe he's going through a bit of a rough patch right now. Maybe they kind of limp into the end of this split and then reevaluate, take a break for MSI and reevaluate for the summer season. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, the combination of Kana just being relatively ineffective in the top lane. Canyon, basically, since the T1 series, I would argue kind of being very flippy and very inconsistent. And then Showmaker, including the T1 series, just getting caught out randomly and just seeing very unshowmaker like in his macro and in his play. So
the champion I most associate with Showmaker, like I think a lot of people associate him with LeBlanc because he's been a great LeBlanc player and he often plays it when it's off meta, and he does a lot with it and he makes the really impressive plays. But for me, since I started commentating the LCK a little bit later, like I didn't commentate all of his 2020 games and stuff like that, I always associate him as a mid Lucian player. I associate him as I have perma prio and I am doing everything for my team all the time. And this is unfortunately just not that meta where you actually get to just dick on your opponent in lane and be like, all right, what's up? I'm going everywhere. It's just not that meta. And I don't think it will be for a little while. So we'll see, like, we'll see what changes on future patches and stuff like that. But I hope that he returns to form, and like it just makes me sad to see a player say like I don't want to play this game anymore. Like he's not saying that. I don't enjoy playing this game professionally as much as I used to, is essentially what he's saying. And that makes me sad because he's a legend. And I hope he can.
And obviously they started this season really strong, and like this on paper roster should work really well. And you know, this team, the core of this roster of Canyon and Showmaker, and now that they've added depth, like this could be the most entertaining team to watch in the world. I mean, they're incredibly creative. They have incredibly deep champion pools. They're a really, really fun team to watch when they're playing well.
Yeah. But it's you know, last year we were like, okay, let's wait and see. Like we were a little bit apprehensive about Damwon last year, and we were like, but wait for Worlds, it's going to be great because this team is super smart and they have a wide champion pool, etc. And then they did do very well at Worlds. They didn't win Worlds or anything, but like they performed extremely well. I think higher than their performance in the LCK relatively. Right now, I'm not ready to say, you know, to make those bold claims. I think a lot of things have to change first, but I'm hoping. I'm not hopeful, but I'm hoping. You know,
I'm hopeful for summer. Like this is a team that I think could ramp up in summer and continuously do better. So I kind of think it's more or less a lost cause. Like I think they're good enough to make playoffs and probably make a quick exit in spring, and they'll reset, and maybe we'll see something different in the summer split.
I guess we could talk really quick about next week. Because the schedule stuff is really interesting in the context of some of the stuff we talked about this week.
I mean, KT versus Dplus and T1, the telecom war in the same week. That's pretty great.
Yeah, that is like the same way that Liiv SANDBOX was tested.
Of T1 versus Liiv SANDBOX, they just play each other in back-to-back weeks. That's pretty fun.
I mean, it's like this week was pretty stacked at the end. Like it was pretty sick, and then next week is also stacked. So just to give everyone the context, T1 and Liiv SANDBOX just played against each other. They play against each other again, and then T1 has to fight KT. So that telecom war. So pretty tough schedule for T1 again. KT's schedule is like literally the same as Liiv SANDBOX's last week. So the same way Liiv SANDBOX was tested last week, KT will now be tested with Dplus and T1. KT then play in the following week Gen.G and Liiv SANDBOX. So KT have an insane schedule. Like their next 4 games are crazy tough. So it's really exciting.
And then the week after that, their first game is Hanwha Life. They literally play all of the other teams in the playoffs, like back to back to back to back to back, and then they end the season with BRION, Kwangdong, and DRX.
Yeah. So like KT, I mean, they have a nice cushy end of the season, and they may need some of those points. You know, at the end, we're like, all right, well, they need to win all 3 of these games to jump up in the standings. Like I think they're probably going to make playoffs, but will they? You know, what place they get will affect their seeding, and getting top 4 is really important. So we'll be talking about some of that stuff towards the end of the season. And then Gen.G have like the easiest schedule ever. So Gen.G had this like really tough you know, run of things where they almost lost to DRX. I mean, that was a really messy series. I wouldn't say almost lost to, or sorry, Kwangdong, I think it was they played against. Really rough series from Gen.G this week. Then going to that 3rd game against T1, failing. So that's like, all right, really rough times. KT beats you before that, and then they get Nongshim and DRX. So Gen.G is gonna get like a little easy week this week. Hopefully, if it's not an easy week for them, then that's a bit concerning. But those are the big ones. I'm not that interested in talking about. I know a lot of people have commented and reached out to us, like being like, "Why don't you guys talk about Bro more? The Giga Chads." We're just not that interested in talking about them right now.
I liked how Morgan pulled the ultimate bro move by giving Gumayushi the pentakill. He was the true bro.
That was the true Giga Chad play. Yeah, in an earlier time of esports, he might have been fined for that.
You guys like BRION because you like the memes.
Yeah, I don't want to talk about BRION or Kwangdong Freaks right now or DRX, God forbid at this moment in time, until we see some real improvement and some play that doesn't depress me, because casting BRION has been one of the hardest things I've done this season, because they just, even if they're massively ahead, they just can't close out their leads. And it's painful. Like, where you're like, oh, are they going to mess it up? Are they going to mess it up? Oh my God, they're probably going to mess it up. We're going to a 35-minute game where this game could have ended at like 26 if they pushed all their leads. And then DRX, I look at the players and I'm like, this makes me sad. I don't want to talk about it right now. And Kwangdong Kwangdong was almost worthy of being discussed. Like, we probably would have talked about Kwangdong a little bit last week. This week, I'm like, we'll wait a little bit longer.
Hey, yeah, I think Kwangdong, at least you can see the CV Max touch start to happen. I think they played a pretty legit series against Gen.G. They're better than their record shows. Like, Bulldog seems like a player that's actually like developing nicely and coming along. Taeyun is not good, but you're not going to hit 100% of the time with rookie players. But I think Youngjae and Bulldog look pretty legit, if I'm being honest. And I think Kwangdong is a team that's improving.
Dudu is good in the lane. I think his macro needs a lot of work. There were times in that last Kwangdong series I was desking with Brendan, and I was like, he's teleporting into this fight as Fiora. Let's see how many autos he does in this team fight, because he would literally just teleport when he's about to kill. Like, it's an extended fight where he could kill like 2 turrets on top. It's a dragon fight that's a Drake they don't need, and then he teleports in, like lunges at one person, and then like walks all the way back top. I'm like, don't do this to me, dude! Like, just don't do it. Yeah, the team has like some. They're like Play-Doh right now, and like, still being melded by CV Max, and he's gonna make the sculpture eventually. But they're still Play-Doh. They're still Play-Doh right now, Monty.
I think as a Play-Doh team is a good analogy. And yeah, like, they're gonna do okay/good against some of the bottom tier teams, but I mean, you guys just like them because of the memes.
Yeah, I mean, look, they had a good start to the season, all right, and that's all we can ask for. We'll talk about them. We'll talk about them when they. I mean, look, if something crazy happens with them, they have a great game, we'll talk about them, guys. But at this moment in time, we got to talk about the important ones. We only have so much time on the show.
Indeed.
And on that note,
and especially when we haven't talked about the good teams for a couple weeks, also.
Yeah. True.
So yeah, lots of exciting stuff. This is the beginning of the KT gauntlets this week, and KT, they didn't play to the level of their opponents. They comfortably 2-0'd the bad teams they played this week, so they didn't get hit by a trap game after coming off a win where a week where they had like a couple of very legit performances against Dplus and Gen.G, and those wins, in spite of, again, maybe those teams not playing to the fullest potential. But now there are no excuses. Now, if KT can beat these teams, they should be taken seriously over these next few games. And so hopefully we'll see some truly super legit KT wins that will make them at least maybe an outside challenger at a title, because that's where they need to be right now.
I'd love to see it. I'd love to be excited for KT Rolster. running through that playoff bracket. That's what I
But
want.
you're not excited right now. Just
No,
to
I
be
am a little bit excited. I am
don't
just
you
a
do
little,
that.
just a little
No,
bit.
don't you do that. don't you do that. I know. I started that meme. That meme. So I'm warning you. Don't you do that. But yeah.
I always think of the very famous MonteCristo tweet. You know what? I will fucking get excited for KT. That's always in my head, and that's kind of me right now. Like I'm almost there. I'm almost there.
Don't do it. That's the doom that will befall us all. So as fans know, we don't get excited about KT. We just wait until they've actually claimed the prize, and then only at that point in time can you get excited. So until they win the playoffs, until they win the league, that's it. No excitement. But even if you get excited and they win and they go to MSI, they'll probably lose. So we can just never get excited. We can just even when they're in
never be excited until like KT has as many achievements as T1 on their banner in the little park. Like
exactly.
like
I mean,
in 10 years, like they've won like 7 titles in a row, and everyone's like really bored, and Monty's like, "Hold on, don't get excited."
I've been here, guys. I know how it goes. That's how you bring the doom upon yourself. All right, guys, we will be back next week. Thanks for joining us. We'll talk probably a lot about KT next week. See you then.